The rain had ceased just as the orchestra struck its final note, leaving the air within Ashbourne Hall thick with candle smoke and rumor. Beneath the glitter of chandeliers and the murmur of silk gowns, Lady Evelina Cavendish stood at the edge of her own wedding celebration, her smile polite, her heart restless. Only 7 days had passed since she had entered this house as the Duchess of Ashbourne, wife to one of England's most admired noblemen, and yet tonight she felt more a guest than a bride. Her gown, a fragile thing of ivory lace, caught the golden light like a ghost of her vanished joy. Across the ballroom, her husband, the Duke, spoke gravely with his mother, the Dowager Duchess, whose expression carried the calm precision of a strategist who had never lost a battle. The music resumed, soft and genteel, but the tone in the room had shifted. Whispers rose like the hum of distant bees, fragments of sentences caught between laughter and malice. "A letter from another man," someone murmured. "Before the wedding, they say." Evelina caught her name, her title, and the word impropriety woven into the air with cruel fascination. The chill that traveled through her was not from the cold, but from recognition. Society's approval, once granted, could vanish with a whisper. She turned to find her husband's eyes upon her, uncertain, searching. In that gaze, so blue, so familiar, she saw doubt. Adrian Cavendish, Duke of Ashbourne, was a man bred to command. His manner had always been measured, his affections quiet but sincere. He had defied his family to marry Evelina, a commoner's daughter whose intelligence and warmth had disarmed him from their first conversation beneath the oaks of Somerset. Yet now, surrounded by the watchful nobility who had always doubted her worth, his confidence faltered. The dowager's words from earlier that evening echoed in his mind. "Love is an indulgence, my son. Reputation is inheritance. Do not mistake one for the other." When the music faded again, the dowager advanced, her movements graceful, her voice a low current of command. "Adrian," she said, "the matter cannot be ignored. The servants speak of a correspondence, found in her chamber. A man's hand, and words unfit for a duchess." The assembled guests, sensing a spectacle, lingered. Evelina's voice trembled as she replied, "That letter is a falsehood. I wrote no such thing." But even truth, when spoken softly, can sound like pleading. The Duke's jaw tightened. "Where is the letter?" he asked. A maid was summoned. The folded paper was brought forth, smelling faintly of lavender and dust. The handwriting, neat but unfamiliar, bore her name in delicate script. Evelina reached for it, but his hand intercepted hers. "You deny this entirely?" he asked, his tone clipped, formal. "I do," she whispered. "I swear it before God." The dowager's sigh cut through the room like a blade. "And yet the ink is fresh," she observed. For a moment, silence reigned, so deep that even the chandeliers seemed to hold their breath. The Duke's pride warred with his heart. He longed to believe her, but the hall's hundreds of watching eyes pressed against his will. Every noble in attendance waited for his verdict, the judgment that would preserve or destroy her standing. And so, with a voice that barely concealed his anguish, he said the words that would haunt him thereafter. "You must leave Ashbourne until the truth is settled." Evelina felt the floor tilt beneath her. "You mean to cast me out?" she asked, disbelief coloring her pale face. "Only until this matter is cleared," he replied, though his eyes betrayed hesitation. The dowager's gloved hand rested lightly on his arm, a gesture that spoke of triumph cloaked in maternal concern. "For your honor, Adrian," she murmured. "For the family name." The servants moved quickly, trained by long years of obedience. Within the hour, her trunks were fetched. The rain began again, soft and unrelenting, as if the heavens themselves wept for her. She stood at the great doors of the hall, her shawl drawn tightly around her shoulders. No one offered her a farewell. From the upper gallery, she glimpsed the faces of guests, some pitying, others curious, none brave enough to speak. Adrian descended the steps halfway, then stopped. For a breathless instant, it seemed he might call her back. But pride, that silent tyrant, bound his words. "I will send for you," he said finally, though the promise already rang hollow. She curtsied with fragile dignity. "As you wish, my lord." Her voice was steady, her tears unseen. The carriage door closed. The horses stirred. As the wheels turned upon the gravel, she gazed back once, at the tall windows aglow with light, at the man she loved who would not move to stop her. Each hoofbeat carried her further from the life she had dared to believe was hers. Inside the carriage, she pressed a hand to her abdomen, the faintest stir of life reminding her of a secret yet unknown even to him. But now was not the time for hope. Survival demanded silence. Back within the hall, the music resumed out of awkward necessity. The dowager instructed the orchestra to play something cheerful. "Let it not be said that Ashbourne celebrations end in scandal," she declared, her tone serene. Adrian stood apart, glass in hand, staring into nothing. The paper lay crumpled in his fist, the supposed letter that had damned his wife. Something about the handwriting troubled him. It bore the style of his family's steward, not the fluid lines of Evelina's hand. But he did not act upon the doubt. Not yet. Later, in the solitude of his study, he unfolded the letter again. The words were vague, romantic, yes, but impersonal. "I shall await you where the violets grow." That line pierced him with memory. Evelina had once said those very words during their courtship, laughing under the old oak where they had first met. Could it be mere coincidence? The thought gnawed at him, but pride demanded silence. Outside, the storm thickened. A servant entered hesitantly, holding something wrapped in linen. "Her Grace left this behind," the girl said. It was a single pressed violet, fragile and dry, kept between the pages of a small prayer book. Adrian took it without a word. The petals were faded, yet still carried the faintest scent of spring. He turned it in his fingers, the softness crumbling like the memory of her touch. In the great, echoing hall above, his mother's laughter drifted faintly, a sound of victory disguised as relief. "You have done what duty required," she told him when they met again. "A duchess must be beyond reproach." He nodded, though her words landed like stones upon his chest. "Indeed," he said, his voice hollow. When he finally retired for the night, the violet lay on his desk, its shadow stretching long across the parchment. Outside, the road to Somerset glistened beneath the moonlight. The carriage carrying Lady Evelina moved slowly through the mist, the lanterns flickering. Inside, she sat upright, eyes fixed ahead, refusing despair's comfort. "They may strip me of name and title," she murmured softly, "but they shall not take my truth." The child within her stirred again, a silent promise that the story was far from over. Back at Ashbourne, the Duke stood alone before the window, the last of the candlelight fading behind him. Pride had won the evening, but not his peace. Somewhere beyond the rain, beyond the reach of his power, the woman he loved was vanishing into darkness, and with her, the part of himself that could still believe in goodness. The hour struck midnight. The violet's shadow trembled. And so began the year that would change them both forever. Morning in Somerset broke quietly, the fields brushed with pale mist and the distant song of larks. In a small stone cottage at the edge of a village, Evelina Cavendish sat by the hearth, her needle moving with steady precision through coarse fabric. Her hands, once soft from gentler tasks, now bore faint scars from labor. A cradle rested near her chair, and within it, her infant son stirred. His eyes, startlingly blue against the firelight, mirrored those of the man who had banished her. She paused to study him, her expression tender but shadowed by sorrow. The villagers knew her only as Mrs. Evans, a quiet widow who earned her keep through sewing. None suspected that the child who gurgled beside her carried the blood of a duke. Each day unfolded with the rhythm of necessity. Fetch water, mend garments, hush the baby when thunder rolled across the hills. In this simplicity she found a fragile peace, though her heart carried the weight of every unspoken word left behind at Ashbourne Hall. At night, when the wind sighed through the thatch, she would whisper to her son of the father he would one day meet, not as a lord, but as a man she once loved beyond reason. She told him that truth was like a seed buried deep, it would rise, even through stone. Far from that quiet life, Adrian Cavendish, the Duke of Ashbourne, lived in a house that seemed emptier with each passing month. The laughter that had once filled its halls was gone, replaced by the slow tick of clocks and the hollow sound of footsteps. Servants moved carefully, avoiding his gaze. He had dismissed several after discovering their gossip about the vanished duchess, But whispers persisted like dust that could never be swept away. In public, he was composed. In solitude, he was restless. Every letter he wrote ended in the same way. Unfinished, abandoned beside the violet he kept pressed in a small silver box. The dowager duchess continued to rule her domain with cold efficiency. "You will remarry," she reminded him over breakfast, her tone devoid of tenderness. "Ashbourne must have an heir." He gave no reply, only stirred his tea until the spoon trembled. It was then she realized the subject was closed, though she did not yet understand why. Adrian no longer sought society's approval. The nobility who had applauded his obedience now found him distant, brooding, unsociable. They called it melancholy. He knew it was remorse. It was on a winter afternoon that truth, long buried, began to stir. The Duke's steward, a nervous man named Hollings, presented a list of estate accounts for his review. Among the ledgers was a note written in a familiar hand. His mother's, addressed to a certain Colonel Finch, a distant cousin. The words were polite but unmistakable. "The letter has served its purpose. My son will see reason now." Beneath the neat script, the date was marked 1 week before Evelina's dismissal. Adrian's hand froze. The paper slipped from his grasp. The revelation came not as a bolt of lightning but as a slow, suffocating tide. The letter that ruined Evelina had been forged at his mother's command. He rose abruptly, the chair scraping across the marble. Hollings stammered an apology, though none was required. "Send for my carriage," Adrian said, his voice sharp. "I am leaving at once." He took the violet with him, tucking it safely into his breast pocket like a talisman. The journey southward was long and wet with rain. He traveled in silence, his thoughts consumed by the memory of her eyes on that final night, hurt, yet still filled with dignity. How easily he had doubted her. How swiftly he had chosen pride over love. Each mile brought the sting of what he had lost. Not merely a wife, but the only person who had ever looked at him without expectation. By the time he reached Somerset, the storm had softened into mist. The village he entered was modest, its lanes muddy and narrow, its cottages clustered close for warmth. He asked discreetly after a Mrs. Evans, a seamstress of quiet reputation. The innkeeper nodded toward the hill beyond the churchyard. "Lives alone, save for a child. Keeps to herself." Adrian thanked him, though his pulse quickened with dread. He could not yet imagine the life she had been forced to make without him. At the cottage door, he hesitated. Light flickered through the window, and the faint sound of lullaby drifted into the damp air. He knew that voice, even softened by time. It reached through him like a thread drawn taut. When she appeared in the doorway, candle in hand, her face was both changed and achingly familiar. She was thinner, her beauty tempered by hardship, yet her eyes held the same quiet intelligence that had first undone him. For a long moment, neither spoke. The rain whispered against the thatch, the child's soft cry carried from within. "Evelina," he said at last, the name emerging as both confession and plea. She did not move closer. "You should not be here," she answered. "The world believed I was gone, and I prefer it that way." He took a step forward, but she lifted her chin, a gesture of restrained defiance. "Why have you come?" "I was deceived," he said. "The letter, my mother's doing. I wronged you grievously." His voice faltered, heavy with remorse. "I cannot undo what was done, but I beg you to let me make amends." Her gaze flickered toward the cradle. "Make amends," she repeated softly. "Can a year of exile be mended by words?" She turned away then, perhaps to steady herself, perhaps to hide the tremor in her voice. "Go back to your world, my lord. Mine has no place for titles." Adrian followed her inside, the warmth of the hearth brushing his damp coat. He saw the cradle, the small figure within it stirring beneath a woolen blanket. His breath caught. "A child?" The question was barely sound. She nodded once. "Your son." Silence filled the cottage, deep and reverent. The Duke knelt beside the cradle, his gloved hand trembling as he reached toward the sleeping boy. The child's fingers closed around his thumb, a gesture so small, yet it shattered every wall within him. He looked up at Evelina, eyes bright with wonder and guilt. "I should have been here," he whispered. "I should have believed you." Her answer came gently, without malice. "Belief is a fragile thing. Once broken, it seldom returns the same." She watched as he bent his head, pressing a kiss to the boy's forehead, the gesture of a man who had finally understood loss. Outside, the rain ceased. The clouds parted just enough for moonlight to spill through the window, bathing the small room in silver. For the first time in a year, neither spoke of titles or duty. There was only the sound of a child's soft breathing and the uncertain rhythm of two hearts learning how to begin again. Yet beyond that fragile peace, a shadow remained, the knowledge that the dowager would not let her son's defiance go unanswered. Evelina sensed it even as she watched him cradle their child. The world that had destroyed her would not forgive easily. Still, when Adrian lifted his gaze to hers, she saw something that steadied her fear: conviction. He had returned not as the Duke, but as the man she once loved beneath the Somerset oaks. And though forgiveness could not yet be spoken, the story between them was far from finished. The following morning dawned clear and cold, the kind of English winter light that turned frost into silver lace across the fields. Evelina awoke to the soft creak of the cottage door and found Adrian standing by the hearth, feeding the fire as though he belonged there. He had not slept, though he carried himself with a restrained calm that spoke more of endurance than rest. She watched him quietly for a moment, uncertain whether the night's reunion had been real or a fragile dream. When he turned, the look in his eyes dispelled all doubt. He had come not merely to ask forgiveness, but to stay until he earned it. "I have written to London," he said quietly, his voice hoarse from unshed words. "I will not return to Ashbourne until you and our son are ready to come with me." Evelina's hand stilled upon the cradle. The idea seemed impossible, her name restored, her child recognized. "Your mother will not allow it," she replied. "Society will not forget what it was told." Adrian crossed the room, the firelight glinting off his dark hair. "Then let them remember something new," he said. "Let them remember that I chose truth over vanity." His certainty unsettled her. She had imagined 1,000 ways he might return, penitent, pleading, distant, but not like this, with quiet resolve and a gentleness that disarmed her defenses. Yet even as warmth crept through her heart, doubt lingered. A year of survival had taught her to mistrust hope. "Adrian," she said softly, "my reputation cannot be mended by declarations. You of all men know what gossip becomes in drawing-rooms." He smiled faintly, the expression sad but unyielding. "Let them speak. I have lived too long with silence." They spent the day together in an uneasy peace. Evelina prepared tea while he mended a loose shutter outside, his fine hands unaccustomed to such work but unwilling to remain idle. From time to time, he would pause to look in through the window, where his son lay on a quilt kicking his small feet. It was as though every simple act, the sound of the child's laughter, the warmth of shared space, was a revelation he feared might vanish if he looked away. Evelina saw it too and felt something soften within her. Whatever else had passed between them, he had returned not out of pride, but remorse. When evening fell, she lit the single lamp that hung above the table. Adrian sat across from her, the flickering light deepening the lines of exhaustion around his eyes. "Tell me about him," he said, gesturing toward the cradle. "Everything." She hesitated, then spoke of sleepless nights, of fevers endured alone, of small milestones. The first smile, the first time the boy reached for her. "I named him Thomas," she said quietly. "It was my father's name. I feared using yours might bring him harm." Adrian's gaze lingered on the child. "Thomas Cavendish," he murmured, testing the sound of it. "He will carry both names, if you permit it, and both heritages." The words were simple, but in them lay a vow. For a long moment they sat in silence, the crackle of the fire filling the space between them. Later, when the child had been settled, Evelina rose to clear the table. Adrian watched her move through the lamplight, still graceful, though weariness shadowed her. "I have thought often," he said quietly, "of the night we met. You were reading beneath the oak, though you pretended to be sketching. You told me I mistook silence for indifference." She smiled faintly. and you mistook curiosity for admiration. Perhaps, he replied, but I was not wrong to admire you. The words, spoken without artifice, reached her more deeply than any apology could. Outside, wind swept through the valley, rattling the shutters. The moment of ease passed, replaced by a weight neither could ignore. You mean to confront your mother, Evelina said, turning to face him. You cannot. She will see the child as proof of betrayal, not love. Then let her, he said. Her cruelty is her own inheritance. I will not pass it to our son. His voice carried quiet conviction, but she heard the tremor beneath it, the dread of what awaited him at Ashbourne. She understood that pride still held him, though it now served conscience instead of vanity. That night, when she retired, she found sleep elusive. Memories came unbidden. The day she left the hall, the endless road beneath the rain, the hollow ache of abandonment. Yet mingled with the pain was something new, a fragile thread of trust, thin but unbroken. She rose, wrapped herself in a shawl, and went to the hearth. Adrian sat there still, awake, his hands clasped before him. You should rest, she murmured. He looked up, startled, as though he had been lost in thought. I cannot, he said. I have spent too long sleeping through my own mistakes. She hesitated, then seated herself across from him. The firelight painted his features with a gentler warmth than pride had ever allowed. You have changed, she said. Not entirely, he admitted. I still fear losing what I love. I only know now that fear cannot rule me. Her eyes softened. And if I cannot forgive you? He exhaled slowly. Then I will remain here until you do, or until you ask me to leave. But I will not demand what I once failed to earn. His humility disarmed her more than any plea could have. She studied him for a long moment, then reached for the small prayer book on the mantel. Between its pages lay another violet, fragile, faded, but intact. I kept it, she said, placing it before him. Not because I forgave you, but because I could not bear to forget. He traced the brittle petals with his fingertips, his expression unreadable. You kept hope alive when I buried it, he said. That is forgiveness enough. The words lingered between them, tender yet unresolved. At last, she rose, pressing a hand to his shoulder as she passed. You may stay tonight, she said softly. Tomorrow we will speak again. It was neither dismissal nor invitation, but a fragile truce. He inclined his head, gratitude shining through restraint. Good night, Evelina. The following dawn found the world shrouded in mist once more. A knock sounded upon the door, a sharp, official rhythm that made Evelina's heart lurch. Adrian opened it to find a liveried messenger standing in the chill air, his expression solemn. A letter for His Grace from the Dowager Duchess, the man announced. Adrian broke the seal, scanning the page as his expression hardened. The words were few but decisive. Asterisk return at once. Ashbourne's name is at stake. Asterisk. He folded the letter carefully, eyes distant. She knows, Evelina said, her voice low. She will not stop until she has erased me again. Adrian turned to her, the old steel of command rising once more, but this time tempered by love. Then she will learn that some names cannot be erased, he said. This time, I stand for you. The baby stirred in the cradle, as though sensing the tension that filled the air. Evelina reached for him, her arms instinctively protective. Promise me, she whispered, that you will not let anger destroy what love might still mend. Adrian met her gaze, the letter burning quietly in his grasp. I promise, he said, though his voice trembled with the weight of what lay ahead. Outside, the fog began to lift, revealing the road that led northward. He looked once more at the cottage, at the fragile peace they had built within its walls, and knew it would soon be tested. Whatever comes, he said, his voice steady now, I will bring you home. Evelina did not answer, but her hand found his, and for a moment, the world was silent except for the slow crackle of the fire, the sound of hope surviving the storm. The carriage wheels turned steadily over the frost-hardened road as dawn bled pale gold across the horizon. Within, Adrian Cavendish sat upright, his gloved hands resting upon his knees, the dowager's letter folded neatly in his coat. Every mile brought him closer to Ashbourne Hall and the reckoning that awaited there. Beside him, Evelina held their sleeping child, her face composed yet pale beneath the weight of returning to the place that had destroyed her. Outside, the countryside lay hushed beneath a skin of ice, the bare branches etched like black veins against the morning light. It was a landscape both familiar and foreign. England itself seemed to hold its breath. As the grand gates of Ashbourne came into view, Evelina felt her heart twist. The ironwork still bore the Cavendish crest, unchanged, untouched by her absence. A year ago, she had passed beneath it as an outcast. Today, she returned not as a supplicant, but as a mother and a wife whose truth could no longer be denied. The Duke's men recognized the carriage at once, though confusion rippled among them when they saw the veiled woman beside him. None dared speak. Adrian's expression forbade inquiry. Inside, the vast hall appeared as it always had, immense, immaculate, indifferent. Chandeliers glittered above the marble floor. Portraits of ancestors gazed down from gilded frames, their painted eyes cold with generations of judgment. At the head of the staircase stood the dowager duchess, her bearing regal as ever, though her lips tightened at the sight of the woman she had thought buried in scandal. "You bring her here," she said, her voice smooth but sharpened with disbelief. "And with a child?" Adrian's reply was quiet, deliberate. "With my wife," he said, "and with my son." A tremor passed through the watching servants. The dowager descended the stairs slowly, each step measured. "You forget yourself," she said. "This household cannot abide deceit." Evelina met her gaze, calm and unflinching. "Nor can it abide injustice," she answered softly. "Yet both have lived here." The dowager's eyes flashed, but Adrian's voice cut through before she could reply. "Enough, mother. The deceit was yours. I know of the letter. I know what you did." The silence that followed was absolute. The dowager's composure faltered for the briefest instant, then she drew herself upright. "I acted for your preservation," she said. "You would have thrown away our name for sentiment." "For love," he corrected. "And for honor, which you mistook for weakness." He stepped closer, his tone firm but mournful. "You taught me to protect our family's legacy. Today I do so by restoring what you destroyed." Her face hardened into marble. "And you imagine society will forgive you? They will whisper of madness. A duke enthralled by the woman who shamed him." Adrian's mouth curved into a faint, sad smile. "Let them whisper. They will tire before I do." He turned then to the assembled household. "Lady Evelina Cavendish returns to Ashbourne as Duchess, rightful and true. Any who question it may find other employment by morning." Not a voice rose in protest. Evelina stood silent through it all, her fingers tightening around the child she held. When the dowager's gaze shifted toward the infant, something flickered across her face, recognition, perhaps even guilt. The boy's eyes, blue as the Ashbourne crest, met hers with innocent wonder. The dowager looked away first. "So," she said after a long pause, "the heir has returned." Her tone was neither tender nor cruel, merely resigned. "It appears, my son, that you have secured what I once feared you would lose." "Not secured," Adrian said quietly. "Redeemed." The day unfolded beneath a strained peace. Word of the Duchess's return spread quickly through the estate. Some servants bowed respectfully, others watched in cautious silence. Evelina walked through the familiar corridors as if through memory itself, the drawing-room where she had first played piano as a new bride, the garden terrace where Adrian had once promised her the world. Everything was as it had been, and yet nothing was. The walls still glittered with wealth, but she sensed that the heart of the place had changed. That evening, a formal dinner was held at Adrian's insistence, a declaration before the eyes of all who had once witnessed her humiliation. Invitations had gone out to neighboring estates, and by twilight, carriages lined the drive. Evelina dressed simply, refusing jewels or ornament. "I will not outshine truth with gold," she told Adrian, who watched her with quiet admiration. When they entered the hall together, conversation ceased. Every face turned toward the Duchess who had returned from ruin. The meal passed with polite tension. Finally, when dessert was served, Adrian rose. "You all remember," he said, "the night a year past when scandal was spoken here. You remember the shame laid upon my wife's name. Tonight I tell you that it was false. My mother, in her zeal for legacy, forged the lie that condemned her. Let this gathering bear witness that Lady Evelina Cavendish was, and is, blameless." Gasps rippled through the table. The dowager did not speak. Evelina, though trembling, stood beside him. "I seek no vengeance," she said softly, her voice carrying despite its gentleness. "Only the right to live without falsehood. The world may forget me. I ask only that my son never must." Adrian took her hand, the gesture both tender and defiant. "He shall not," he said. For a long moment, the hall was utterly still. Then, as if by silent accord, the guests rose. Some inclined their heads in respect, others merely in curiosity, but the tide had turned. The scandal that once defined her had begun to dissolve beneath the weight of truth. Later, when the guests had departed and the candles burned low, Adrian found Evelina standing in the garden. The moon hung low above the hedges, the air cold but fragrant with early blossoms. "Do you regret it?" he asked quietly. She turned, her shawl brushing against his sleeve. "Returning," she said. "No. Only that it took us so long to find courage." He smiled faintly. "Courage was always yours." They walked together along the path that led toward the old oak beyond the terrace, the same tree where their courtship had begun. Beneath its bare branches, Adrian paused. "I have ordered the crest redrawn," he said. "It will bear the violet you loved, a symbol of what endured when we did not." Evelina's eyes shimmered. "A fragile flower for a fragile truth," she murmured. "Fragile things survive," he said. "You taught me that." The house loomed behind them, vast and silent, but its cold grandeur no longer seemed to threaten. Within its walls, their child slept peacefully for the first time under the roof of his birthright. The dowager had withdrawn to her chambers without a word. Time would decide what repentance, if any, she could offer. Evelina looked toward the horizon where dawn would soon return. "Do you think love can truly erase what pride has written?" she asked. Adrian took her hand. His answer quiet but certain. "Not erase," he said, "but overwrite." They stood there as the wind stirred the violets at their feet, the same flowers she had once pressed between the pages of her prayer book, a relic of hope. The moonlight softened the edges of the hall, turning stone to silver. And in that calm, Evelina felt something she had not known in a long time: peace without fear. Far away, the bells of the village church began to chime, signaling a new hour, a new day. The Duke drew her close, and their child's laughter, faint through the window above, carried through the night air. The narrator might have said that history would remember Ashbourne for its lineage, its titles, its estates. But in truth, its greatest legacy would be this: that love, once exiled, had returned home, and in doing so, had restored not only a name, but the very soul of the house itself.